So in the last video, or towards the end of the last video, we found how many columns we could return by doing this lab here. So we're going to move on to this one, which is finding a column that can contain text. So a column in SQL can have different data types. So I've got this up here. So you can have characters which can contain letters, numbers and special characters. And then further down you've got numbers as well, so integers, floats, which is decimal points. So for example, if you had a column that had ID, you would have it as an integer, because IDs are typically going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Anything else, you'd usually have it as char here, or varchar, which means that cell can contain letters, numbers, or special characters. So, for example, we go to this lab. So it's going to continue off the last one, as in we're still going to use the union select. So we didn't actually have a read. This lab contains an SQL injection vulnerability in the product category filter. The results from the query are returned in the application's response. So you can use a union attack to retrieve data from other tables. To construct such an attack, you first need to determine the number of columns returned by the query. You can do this using a technique we learned in the last one, which we did last night, or in the last video. The next step is to identify a column that is compatible with string data. Okay, so let's set this up with burp. So AC20. Turn it on. Again, I'll go through all this and I'll make another video about burp. So don't worry too much if this doesn't make sense, because I'll have a video out soon. So this is very similar to the last lab that we did. So if we click GIFs, it returns everything that's under that category. So we can see, just like the last lab, it's got potentially 3 columns, but we can test that. Up here as well, it says make the database retrieve the string this here. So we've got this request here, which is us asking the web server for everything that is within a category of GIFs, and then we have our response here, which is what the web server is basically bringing back to us. So let's bring up Sublime. So what's potentially happening here is it's sending a query saying select all from the table name. We don't have a table name, where item name, let's say that's the name of the column, equals GIFs. So hopefully this makes sense based on the other videos that we did. So we're selecting it all from table name, where the item name, which is potentially the column name, we don't know that, equals GIFs, or could even be category name, and then it's going to return it back. So what we can do is we can create our own injection. So when this gets sent, let's say, just for ease of explaining it, let's say this is hard coded in. So when we click GIFs and it sends it here in this parameter here, it's going to add that. So add the first quote, going to fill it in with GIFs, which is basically what we have requested. And then it's going to add that automatically after. So it adds the last single quote at the end of the input, which comes from here. So we can, based on what we've learned, we can finish that off ourselves. I suppose actually we can say GIFs still. No, we'll finish it off ourselves because GIFs already in there. Then we can bring our union select again because we're trying to select another table. Now we don't know how many columns have been returned. We can suspect there's 3 based on the last lab, but let's just start with 1, just because we don't know, we can't assume. And then after that we want to do our comment. So anything that's after this, potentially that's been hard coded in, is going to be ignored. So let's send this to repeater so we don't have to keep using this side here to keep sending requests. We can just click send and it will send the request itself. So let's come back with a 200 OK, which is fine. That's pretty much the same as here. If we rendered it, we can see exactly the same as what we can see here. So let's add our own single quote, union select null. So we want to encode that and send. We've got an internal server error. So then let's put that there. So we know it's not going to be 1 column. We know that we can't just return 1 column. So let's try 2 columns. Get the same 500 internal error. See it down here. So let's try another one. Remember, we can use the order by if you wanted to, which is quicker. Need to encode this. Send. Oh, and we've got a 200 OK. So that means that there's three columns, and if we render it, we get our list back. So we could have finished that off order by 2, let's say, just to actually no, because we know there's 3, so let's just say 4. But we know that we would have got an internal error, so then we can just change. I'm not going to bother doing it in Sublime. We change that to 3, we get an OK. So we've confirmed by two methods that there is 3 columns that we can use. So now we need to establish which one of these columns is or can accept and return strings, and strings are just text basically. So you can see that this one is potentially going to return some strings. Maybe this one could be as well, and this one, but we'll see. So to test it, all we do is we just put a string, so A, B, C, D, within single quotes. So let's chuck that in there, encode it, and send. Okay, so we render that, we get an internal server error. So let's put this back. And let's do this, ABC. Doesn't have to be ABC, it can be anything you want as long as it's letters. Encode that. And we get a 200. Okay, so that means that we can potentially use this second one to return strings. So let's also just try. So now we know that the middle one we'll do string. So let's just say, let's try the third one just to see what that can return. We get 500 error. So it looks like just the middle one is the one that we can use to return. So to solve this, we need to make it return this at the top here. So U6LCIK. So it's quite easy to do. We know that the second column is the one that can return strings. So all we're going to do is just put it in there, 6ULCIK. So then this will display on the website. Let's just put it here. And send. So you can see as soon as we sent that request, we've got the lab's now solved. So it's solved even though we haven't touched the actual browser because we're sending responses using burp. So if you render this and make this wider, you can see that our goal was to make the database retrieve that string, and we have done so here. So that is that one done. So first of all, you need to find out how many columns there are when you're assessing something for SQL or trying to retrieve data. You need to find out how many columns there are that can be returned. And most of the time, obviously, most malicious hackers will want to try and get hold of user credentials, so passwords, usernames, stuff like that. So they will be strings. So you'll be looking for whatever column can return strings. So based on this here that we looked at, you can see that there are many different types of data types. These are all numeric here, date and time. So it can sometimes take a little bit of trial and error to try and find out what type of data type it can return, or which column can return string, if that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for example, if a malicious hacker were trying to find a column that would return integers, so numbers, if they're trying to find, I don't know, account numbers, let's say, then you would, which one is it? Here. So all you'd need to do is, rather than having this here, you would just do, instead of doing ABC or a string of some sort, you just put some numbers, whichever, and it'll be the same principle. If that column doesn't return numbers, then you get an internal error. The internal error isn't always guaranteed. That's just on ports figure. You could have some sort of other error that is displayed, or if it's filtered or it's not vulnerable to SQL, you could have nothing at all. But yeah, if something is vulnerable to SQL and you do get to this point, then try and find out what columns can contain what type of data. So we finished this one. The next one will be most probably this one. Let's close these. Close that. Let's have a little look at this one. So let's open up the labs. So this contains an SQL injection on the product category filter, so it looks very similar to the last one except without any pictures. You use a union attack to retrieve data from other tables. The database contains a different table called users with columns called username and password. To solve the lab, perform an SQL injection union attack that retrieves all usernames and passwords, and use the information to log in to the administrator account. Okay, so pretty much the same as what we did before. Now this is a different URL, so I need to add the new one, which is this one, to scope. Let's clear all this because that's the old stuff. Okay, so now we're getting it just from this page. So same sort of thing, let's click pets this time. We've got this request here which is asking the web server to return the category for pets. We're going to send this to Repeater so we can work on it without having to keep sending requests using the browser. So first thing we need to do is find out how many columns it can return. So let's get rid of this. So remember that this is what this is happening is, or what this is performing is very similar to this, what we spoke to in the last one, except this is going to be pets. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish off that. We're going to finish off this pets here, so there'd be a single quote here that would be added on the way to the database server, if you like. It's going to have a single quote here. We need to manually finish the last single quote so that we can then add our union, select. Again, we don't know how many columns are going to be returned. So in actual fact, because we've been using union select null quite often, we're going to try and do it a quicker way. We're going to use order by. Order by, let's do 4 and see. So if there's less than 4 columns, you'll get an error because we're asking, oh, I don't need to get rid of the pets, because what we're doing is we're asking the web server or database to order the columns by column 4, which if there's only 3 columns, it's going to have an error because there isn't a 4th column. So we can see up here we've got an internal server error, same down here. So I'm not going to bother changing it Sublime because it's just a number I need to change. So let's try 3, internal error, let's try 2, and we get a 200. Okay, so we know that there is 2 columns, which makes sense because you have potentially, let's show you in this one, potentially this could be a column, the title, and this, the description, could also be a column. Then you've got that and that. So essentially you'd have a column that would perhaps say title, then another column that would say description, for example. So now we know that there are 2. So that is the same as doing, if we were to use the union version, union select null null. So that's the same as writing this up here. So now we need to figure out what the columns can return. So I'm going to start with numbers first. 1, 2, 3. I'm just going to do one at a time. We've got 1, 2, 3 here, up there. So that means that this column here can accept numbers as well. Let's do 1, 2, 3 again. Let's do 4. So if it does work, we can see a difference. Cool. So we know that both columns can return numbers if we wanted them to, but I'm just going to change it up here. So let's just test letters A, B, C. I'm going to change it here because it's quicker, and you can clearly see that I'm changing the 1, 2, 3 from ABC. Okay, also accepts number letters. Look, see that down there. Now let's try this one, ABCD, and it returns that. So these columns will return numbers and letters, which makes sense because you could have a number in a title. You can also have numbers, various numbers in the description, and you can see that you've also got special characters like the full stop, commas potentially somewhere there, and maybe some question marks perhaps somewhere as well. Okay, so now we know that there's two columns that we can return. We know that they both accept numbers and letters. So we also know that there's a table called users with two columns, a username and password. So let's just make another union select. We want to select two columns, which is username, and another column which is password. The password or passwords? Password. So we're asking the database to return the original query, which is the pets information. We're closing that query off. We're adding our own by saying union select username and password. So two columns from another table, which is users, I think it was. And then we're going to comment out everything that comes after that, just in case that there's something that would mess up this request. So let's chuck that in there. So it's loaded okay, and then you can see down here this is the website. You can see it's brought back the first query from pets. Then you can also see it's brought back the query from username, from users, which is these here. So username, password, username, password, username, password, and that looks like that's it. They're the only users here. So I can't copy and paste from here, which is annoying. So what I'm going to do is use intercept, send that request. So it's now captured the request. Do it in here. Again, I will explain all this in the video. Forward, 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 turn it off. Now we've got it loaded here, so I can use this password. There we go, done. So what we've done, where is it? Proxy HTTP. So what we've done is, oh, it's repeater, wasn't it? That's better. We sent a request for pets that in itself requested a query from the database. So all we've done is we've manually closed it off here, and we've added our own union select, which remember will pull information from another table, and we've asked to view the username and the password. Actually, let me show you on here, might be a little bit easier to see. We've requested information within the username and password columns from the table that is named users, and all that's done is returned those two. Sorry about that, I had to pause it for a minute. Yeah, so all it's done is just return the username, the content of the username and password columns from the table users, and it's just shown it on the website here. So let's see what we've got next. Probably going to finish this video because we've done two. I'd like to maybe do one more in another video. Then at some point in the future I'll do a video on blind SQL. So blind SQL is basically where the results aren't shown on the website, on the actual site itself. But we'll go into that. We'll go into that a bit later on. So what's this one? SQL injection vulnerability in where clause allowing retrieval of hidden data. So we're probably going to do one of these, querying the database type version on non-Oracle databases. We're probably going to end up doing this one, which we can have a little look at now. So we need to basically do the same. The only difference is, so it's very similar to this lab that we just did, where we had to tap into the table called users. The only difference is you can see here that they've given us the table name, the column name, and the column name. Whereas this one, which is a little bit more like real life, we don't know. All we know is that we need to log in to the administrator user. So we know that there is a user called administrator, but we don't know what the table name is or what the column names are. So we're going to have to try and do a little bit of information. So that will be in the next video, which will be on shortly.